Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. Welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this bonus upload, shall we? Tonight's first encounter. Last year, I was backpacking with my brother in the mountains of West Virginia. To get to our destination, we had to drive for about 2 hours up a very long and deep-ditched road. After reaching the mountain, we got all the gear out of the car and started our hour-long hike into the woods. Our destination was at the edge of a small lake. Behind us was the long path back to the car, which was covered by fallen trees and thick brush. The area was surrounded by high, jagged cliffs. After about an hour of resting, we set up camp and started a fire. We proceeded to cook as the sun set over the large rock walls across the lake from us. Just after the sun went down is when the strangeness began. Every half hour or so, my brother would hear what he said were soft footsteps coming from the trail behind us. I was really tired and kept blowing it off as a joke. However, as the night passed on, he refused to stop talking about what he was hearing. I told him to shut up because I was tired of hearing it. At around 11 at night, the situation became more bizarre. I had nodded off with my head propped on a log. Then suddenly a large crash could be heard from across the lake. My brother and I both got to our feet and grabbed our shotgun and .44 mag and walked to the edge of the lake to see if we could spot what had made the noise. After a minute of staring into the pitch-black night, we decided to go back and lay down. We both thought it must have been a loose boulder that had fallen off the face of the ridge. That was until my brother told me to stop in an abrupt whisper. "Look there," he said, pointing towards the ridge to our left. It was then that I realized my brother really was hearing things all night long. About 100 yards away from us in the tree line was a figure that looked to be at least 10 feet tall with glowing golden eyes. Paralyzed with fear, my brother and I watched as the large figure swayed back and forth, never taking his eyes off us. "Let's get the fuck out of here," my brother yelled while shooting a round from his .44 into the lake. At this point, the figure stopped and stared. Its eyes seemed to get larger and brighter. Then, just as quick, the eyes were gone. We immediately started stoking the fire as fast as we could, not knowing if the figure would return. We decided to stay up all night, taking turns adding logs to the fire. After an hour or so, we heard a faint rustling in the brush. The rustling then stopped, when all of a sudden this thing roared out of the most terrible scream that we had ever heard. We grabbed our guns and gear. It was time to leave. We both started to sprint into the darkness with our lights turned off. We ran into the woods for at least 10 minutes until the two of us were out of breath and stopped. We turned on our lights to find the path and listened for the creature. It was moving towards us. We could hear the pounding of footsteps and branches snapping. This time the lights stayed on as we ran non-stop, tripping over obstacles until we reached the car. The two of us threw our gear into the vehicle and locked the doors behind us. My brother was shaking with fear and fumbling for the keys. Just as he got the keys into the ignition, a loud scream from the creature blasted from the darkness. He started the car and gunned it. I don't know what the fuck that thing was. All I can say is that I will never return to those woods to find out. Tonight's second encounter. I don't like the term researcher, so I would say I'm a Bigfoot enthusiast who has read a ton of books on the topic, seen every documentary, listened to many Sasquatch podcasts, and have backpacked into what I consider a very active area in North Georgia. Haven't seen a creature, but I had two unbelievable experiences this year. The first experience happened at a campground. I was awakened at around 4 a.m. by a pack of howling coyotes. About 3 seconds after the coyotes started howling, all of a sudden this roaring Yahoo type of scream that sounded like it was coming from all sounds completely drowned out the coyote. It was so loud and powerful that I could feel the vibrations coming through the ground, through my sleeping bag, clearly, nothing I had ever heard before. I've heard other people describe the loud roar sound with these creatures, coupled with the fact that I have studied this mystery for so long, I knew right away that it had to be a Bigfoot. This roar was so loud that the creature couldn't have been more than 100 yards from me, which is a little strange in itself because one side of the campground was a pretty busy road, but nonetheless the area in general of this campground is surrounded by forests. The second experience happened 30 days later, once again not far from where the first experience occurred. This time I was staying at a second campground that was much more secluded and deeper in the forests of North Georgia. It was around 6 at night. I and other campers were standing around talking about some of the hiking we had done earlier that day. Other people were out and about getting their campfire started. Also, there was a campground host who was walking around introducing himself with a clipboard, making sure people had paid, and also joined in the conversations. It was at this time that all of a sudden, roughly 50 yards uphill, on the ridge overlooking the campground, a tree comes crashing down. Moments after the tree had hit the ground, I and all the others were standing around talking, heard what can only be described as a loud, guttural grunt. The kind of grunt you would hear out of a silverback gorilla. All of us were startled, and were asking each other what the heck crashed that tree and then made that deep grunt sound. One of the other campers even mentioned that it was probably a Bigfoot. The other campers laughed, but I didn't think it was too funny because if one of those creatures was nearby, we possibly could be looking at a very dangerous situation. Thankfully, nothing happened after that, but here's where the story gets really weird. At the back of this campground is a dirt road. This road can be used for hiking or traveling during hunting season. One of my favorite things to do when I'm backpacking or camping is to wake up early, get a fire going, and have a nice hot cup of coffee. I got up that morning around 6, got the fire going, and made fresh coffee. As I was sipping my coffee out of the dirt road at the back end of the campground comes this white SUV, completely blacked out, with a big, huge sticker of Patty silhouette stuck on the back window. Me, being the believer in the existence of these creatures, have a few similar stickers on my back window. So I took what I was seeing as a friendly visit from a fellow Bigfoot enthusiast. I took it upon myself to casually walk up and say hello and see if there was anything we could talk about regarding any creature activity in the area. As I approached the driver of the SUV, rolled down his window, went about halfway, and I immediately noticed something odd. First, there were two guys in the SUV, and they were both dressed in full tactical gear. Two AR-15s on a gun rack at the back of the interior, with both gentlemen having military-styled boots, pistols at the ankle, black beanies, and sunglasses. I mean, these guys were completely decked out like law enforcement would be. But there was no badge, just complete tack dress from head to toe. Then I playfully asked, "Are you guys looking for Bigfoot?" The driver of the SUV then said to me, "Why do you ask?" I repeat, "I see the Bigfoot sticker on the back of your vehicle. I have a couple of those on my back window of my car as well." The reply I received was very strange. The driver just looked at me without saying anything, and then the passenger guy, in a very stuttering kind of manner, said, "It's just a practical joke sticker for my girlfriend." After that response, the driver then stepped on the gas, and out of the campground they went. I just find it odd that there is a perfectly healthy tree pushed over, followed by a gorilla-like grunt, and then these two tacked, possibly military guys, show up the next morning out of nowhere, driving a blacked-out SUV with an oversized Sasquatch sticker on the back window. Very, very odd in my opinion. Today's third encounter. Raldo, New Mexico. My sighting happened in the summer of 2007 when I was working the night shift at a surface coal mining facility. I used to drive a coal hauling truck, which was pretty huge and required a series of steps just to climb into the cab. I just completed my pre-shift inspection and I noticed that my radiator was leaking. I called my supervisor and he asked me to drive the truck to the shop. The shop was about 6 miles to the north from the coal pits, which was located in a remote part of the Navajo reservation. I drove the truck to the shop, called the shop foreman, and he radio requested that I park the truck at the south side of the shop. I parked the truck and I lowered the ladder and descended the ladder. I wanted to see how much fluid was left in the radiator. So I lowered the rear ladder and climbed into the engine compartment. The leak was pretty bad, so I climbed down the ladder, and that's when I saw what I believed to be a skinwalker. It was the weirdest thing that I had ever seen. I seen it was about 200 feet from me. It was walking around the other mining equipment. It looked like a huge dog. The fur was beige in color, and it walked on all 4 legs. The coat was pretty patchy, missing clumps of fur and bald spots. It smelled really bad, like a rotten roadside corpse. It had seen me and started to walk towards me. I pulled out my flashlight and I noticed that the dog's eyes did not reflect any light. Its eyes were black and lifeless. Its head made a bobbling motion, and it was walking towards me. Its head was huge. It looked like a bull mastiff, which was my first impression. I initially thought, this is a huge dog, and it's probably sick and hungry. It got within 20 feet of me, and I pulled out my pocket knife. I was ready to defend myself if this thing wanted to attack. I started to walk carefully towards the shop and kept my eyes on the creature. It followed me, paralleled my every step. Its walk wasn't natural and fluid like a normal dog. It moved in an unnatural way. I walked about 150 yards to the shop and it kept its distance. I finally got to the shop and the skinwalker stopped at the driveway of the shop bay doors. I went inside and told the shop foreman and to come and see this weird-looking dog. We both went outside to see it walk away from the shop and turn around and look from the corner of the building. A few seconds later, my supervisor drove around that very corner, and I asked him if he had seen a weird-looking dog animal. He said that he hadn't. I told him that he had to have seen it. he drove in the very direction that it walked off towards. I described what I saw, and my supervisor said that it was a skinwalker. That night, my supervisor made me ride with him throughout the rest of the night shift. He opened me up to a world and told me of his experiences while he worked at the mine. I haven't had any more experiences since that encounter, but I've seen mysterious lights around the mining area that do not make any noises. Tonight's fourth encounter. I have to say that for most of my life I had hiked and hunted and never encountered anything like a Bigfoot or a Dogman, or anything really. I've seen bear, deer, fox, all manner of skittish critters, but never found a sign or a footprint or seen one. Then in '93 I had a close personal friend visit me. He and I were having a good time catching up, and somehow the subject of Bigfoot came up. I told him that I didn't believe in it, that I'd been all over what was supposed to be Bigfoot hotspots, and I ain't seen a damn thing. That's just a bunch of bullshit. He then gets all serious and sullen-like, and I'm looking at him as he tells me of his encounter with a Bigfoot. He said the one he saw was down in Georgia while he was hunting. He was going to position himself in an area where timber had been harvested the year or two before, because the old logging roads were still open, and the weeds had grown high and provided cover and food for them. He located a snag of treetops that had to have been left behind from the logging operation. He got up in there as it provided him with a good cover spot and afforded him a very clear line of sight down these old logging roads. So he settled himself in. It was about 3 PM, so he poured himself a cup of coffee and took out a snack bar. As he relaxed a bit before he needed to get serious about being all stealthy. He said he had finished eating his snack bar and was about to light a cigarette when he noticed what appeared to be a man come out of the tall weeds, who started looking around at the ground like he was looking for tracks. He also noticed that while it had the correct features for a human, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, the head seemed odd. He described it as not having a discernible neck, and the trap muscles looked like they went to where the ears should be on a normal person. He sort of thought that was odd, but at this point he's still under the impression that it's just another hunter, and he's all bundled up. It is the mid-30s. So my buddy doesn't really concern himself too much with it. The guy's just looking about, and he doesn't see a sign of a gun on him. He could be out scouting or something. Then he noticed that he suddenly had crossed the road and gone into the tall weeds. Now, they are brown, as it is late in the season and right after Christmas, but they provide some very good cover. Now my buddy is a little concerned because there's what he believes is a human right in the immediate area he's hunting. And take my word for it, nothing will upset a hunter more if someone is messing up his hunt. Well, this guy isn't right there. He could be hit by a bullet. My buddy isn't his normal tree stand shooting downward. He's on the ground and shooting level in an area that has been clear cut. Now at this point, my buddy is trying to decide if he needs to relocate, just leave or what, because it was going to be time for the deer out here to be headed back into the woods, and if he's going to get a good shot at them, then he needs to be ready. And he can't see where that damn guy went. Then all of a sudden he hears some kind of commotion coming from the weeds. He's not sure what it is, but he can hear a quick cry and a grunt-like noise. Then he sees at least 20 deer bust out of the brush like mad. He said they were running like the very devil was after them. Of course, all he had in his hand was his cup of coffee, and by the time he threw it down, grabbed his rifle, all the deer were gone. If that son of a bitch comes out, I'm going to have words with him. He was pissed. Anyway, he didn't have long to wait. All of a sudden, he heard something coming through the weeds, and he was watching to see where he came out. Mind you, he still had his rifle up and was scanning up and down the road, nearest to where he heard the noise. Just then, out he popped, only the man was a good deal closer and looked a lot bigger. Then he realized that this guy was wearing a fur coat, and damn if he didn't have a deer over his shoulder. Not just a small deer, but a pretty damn good-sized female. He assumed it was a female because he didn't see a rack on it. Now, when it came out, he was on the left of it, and the deer was over his left shoulder, so he can't see its face. Anyway, just as he's about to stand up and call out to him, the damn thing turned to the left. And when he did, he said he thought he was seeing things. It was no man, and it looked around like it was making sure it was alone. He said he almost messed his pants up because the thing looked right at him, and the pile he was in, and then back the other way again. When it did, he looked through his scope and got a great look at it. It wasn't an ape, but it looked like it had larger than human features, a very prominent brow ridge and a flat nose. He said it looked like it was covered in fuzz or very short hair. At least it didn't look like skin. In a flash, he realized he could take it, and he only had a couple of seconds to really make up his mind to shoot or not. Now, right or wrong, he opted not to shoot unless it came after him, which it didn't. But right as he sorts to relax, this thing lets out a scream that scared the hell out of him. Now, mind you, it's standing about 50 feet from him, and he's looking through his rifle scope, and it just lets out this blood-curdling scream. He watched it look up and down the roads both ways, and quickly, as a flash, it took off carrying a whole deer like it was nothing. According to him, the deer was apparently dead, as it made no movement or effort to get away as it was held, and in seconds it was gone. Now I know this story sounds an awful like many other stories here, but all I can really tell you is this story resounds with me. I knew this fellow, and when you know someone, I mean you really know them, you know when they're not messing with you, and when they aren't. I could clearly see this wasn't a joke. He was dead serious. He and I had hunted together. He used to teach me tracking and some survival techniques, and we were friends. He never would make up a story, and when I would go hiking or hunting, I started paying a little more attention to things, and when I did, it was like magic. I started seeing things I had never seen before, but now they seem to make sense. I believe there is a big old primate-like thing in the woods. I have never found a track or seen one, and I haven't really found anything that I can point out and say, see, this right here, there's your proof. However, I do get out, and I'm always looking. Now, as for my buddy, God love him, he was killed a few years ago in an unfortunate freak accident at work. But just that preceding weekend, he and I had spoken on the phone, and I guess we went on a good hour and a half talking. And as it happened, I asked him about that Bigfoot again, and he told me. He had quit hunting years ago. He didn't say if it was because him seeing the Bigfoot, but I sort of got the impression it was. So I look for it whenever I go out and get a chance to look around. I don't want to offend anyone, but I'd like to say that I would like to shoot one and bring it in for a real analysis and have scientists verify that they are real. Not so much for me, but for my friend who told me about seeing it, sort of to honor him. Alright, I'm gonna just stop right there quick before I go on to the last encounter, but that guy's a fucking asshole. That's just like shooting a Bigfoot for fun. Just, I mean, yeah, your buddy died in an accident. That sucks, that really does suck. But to go out and shoot a Bigfoot for your buddy's memory or whatever, what a fucking toolbox. Anyway, on to the next and final terrifying encounter. When I was a boy, my mother and I lived with my grandfather, who had a farmhouse in the rural location of southwestern Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a handyman who also worked a small blacksmith shop in his old barn. My grandmother had died before I was born, and my father had also passed away while serving overseas in the U.S. Army. Beginning in the summer of 1946, we noticed strange howling sounds coming from the woods that surrounded the property. The activity came at night and was very frightening when the howling came close. The sounds didn't seem to bother my grandfather, though my mother and I were shaken when it would begin. The sounds continued off and on for about a year, but we never noticed any animals. My grandfather and I would hunt for deer and squirrel in the woods during the colder months, but we never saw any signs of unusual animal activity. One late afternoon in spring of 1947, I was helping my grandfather in his shop when I noticed something moving around the edge of the woods, near an area where my grandfather had a few junk cars and other items. It was about 200 feet from our location, but I clearly noticed someone or something moving around. I told my grandfather to look. He walked to the door, lit his pipe, and said nothing. After a minute or two, he turned around and got back to his work. About that time, this thing moved into the woods and disappeared. I couldn't judge how big it was, but it sort of reminded me of magazine pictures I had seen of a large ape that was said to inhabit the Asian jungles. Later that evening, I told my mother what I saw. She was shocked because she knew I wouldn't lie to her, and that the howling sounds had been closer lately. I also told her that my grandfather's response when I pointed out to the creature. She immediately stood up and walked into the sitting room in order to ask my grandfather what it was. He started to shake his head slowly and said that he was hoping that we wouldn't see it, because he was worried we would be scared and leave him. After assuring him that we would never leave him, my mother again insisted that he tell us what the creature was. He looked away, took a deep breath, and said, "It's a dark walker," and said that they live in the woods for many years. He said native Indians called it a stone spirit, and they thought that it was an evil spirit who would appear when someone was about to die. The last time he had seen a dark walker was the night before my grandmother died. My mother was skeptical of a harbinger of death angle, but she sensed that there was something unnaturally nearby. The howling continued each night, though we hadn't seen any signs of this dark walker. One warm evening, we were sitting on the back porch. There were a few howls, but it seemed like the sounds were further away. We were listening to the radio when, all at once, my grandfather stood up and looked out towards the barn. He turned to me, "Boy, go and get my pistol and ammo. Hurry now." I ran into the sitting room and grabbed the .455 Webley revolver and a handful of bullets from the old steamer trunk. I handed it to him and watched him load the gun. He then picked up a hatchet and slid it in his pants belt. "Now, both of you get into the house, now." We were in the kitchen, looking through the screen door and watching my grandfather walk slowly toward the barn. We saw him turn and walk out of sight into the dark. I decided to grab my shotgun and kept it nearby. After a minute or so, we heard 3 gunshots and a blood-curdling scream emanate from the woods near the barn. Then it suddenly stopped, and it was completely quiet. We were frozen and wondering if we should go and look for my grandfather. A few seconds later, we heard him yell, "Stay in the house until I come back." I heard the pickup truck start up. I looked out the storage room window and saw my grandfather drive to the back of the barn and park. Several minutes later, he backed up and drove by the side of the house out into the road. I could see that there was something in the back covered up with a tarp. It was getting late, so my mother told me to go to bed. The next morning, I came downstairs and sat beside my grandfather, who was reading the paper and drinking a cup of coffee. My mother was sitting at the other end of the table, staring at my grandfather. Not long later, she said, "Well, Dad, tell him." My grandfather put the paper down and looked at me. "I killed the Dark Walker." That was all he said. My mother told me not to tell anyone, and the matter was closed. We never talked about it again. My grandfather lived another 15 years, and my mother stayed with him until his dying day. When I grew older, I moved away and raised my own family. I would return home and visit each summer, and never heard another howl again.
Well, there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone's simply treated with the respect we all deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.